"He's not my son." She lied. Mafia boss kissed the boy's forehead and said, "But he's mine now." The rain in Corvale City did not wash things clean. It only made the grime on the sidewalks slicker and turned the neon lights of the downtown district into blurred, bleeding streaks of red and blue against the asphalt. Jenna Rowe shifted the heavy catering crate onto her left hip, wincing as the sharp edge dug into her uniform. She was 26 years old, though the dark circles beneath her eyes and the tension living permanently in her shoulders made her feel decades older. She checked her watch. It was 10 o'clock at night. She had been on her feet since 6 in the morning, transitioning from the breakfast rush at the diner to the prep kitchen, and finally to this delivery. The Tipsy Velvet was not just a club. It was an institution in Corvale, a fortress of mahogany and crushed velvet where the city's elite mingled with its predators. Jenna kept her head down. That was rule number 1 of her life for the past 6 years. Keep your head down, do the work, and never let anyone remember your face. She pushed through the service entrance, the heavy steel door clanging shut behind her. The corridor smelled of expensive cologne and stale cigarette smoke. "Stay close," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. There was no one there. Panic. Cold and sharp, spiked in her chest, she spun around, nearly dropping the crate of hors d'oeuvres. She had told Eli to wait in the car. She'd cracked the window, given him his tablet with the brightness turned down, and promised she would be 10 minutes. But Eli was 6 years old, bored, and possessed of a curiosity that often outpaced his sense of self-preservation. "Eli," she hissed, her voice tight. She abandoned the crate on a stack of beer kegs and moved deeper into the hallway. The thumping bass of the music from the main lounge vibrated through the floorboards. If the manager found a kid wandering around, she would lose the catering contract. If she lost the contract, she lost the rent for the studio apartment on the south side. It was a domino effect she could not afford. She turned the corner into the VIP corridor, a restricted area she knew she should not be in. The lights here were dim, the sconces casting long, golden shadows against the paneled walls, and there he was. Eli was standing in front of a pair of double oak doors, staring up at a painting of a ship caught in a storm. He looked so small in his oversized denim jacket, his dark, unruly hair sticking up at the back. But it was not the painting that froze the blood in Jenna's veins. It was the man standing next to him. Mateo Velez did not look like a monster. He looked like a king who had grown bored of his kingdom. He was leaning against the wall, a crystal tumbler of amber liquid held loosely in one large hand. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Jenna would make in 5 years, tailored perfectly to a frame that was broad, powerful, and radiated a lethal sort of stillness. He was not looking at the painting. He was looking at Eli. Jenna's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She knew that face. Everyone in Corvale knew that face, even if they pretended not to see it. Mateo Velez ran the city. He was the silent owner of the Velvet, the man who decided which shipments came through the docks and which businesses burned down for insurance money. She stepped forward, her legs feeling like lead. "I'm so sorry." Mateo's gaze did not snap to her. It slid over, slow and heavy, like a physical weight. His eyes were the color of obsidian, dark and unreadable, and they narrowed slightly as they took her in. He saw the cheap uniform, the frayed cuffs, the terror she could not quite mask. "He wandered off," Jenna said, forcing a breathless laugh that sounded brittle to her own ears. She reached for Eli's shoulder, her grip tighter than she intended. "Come on, Eli, we have to go." Eli looked up at her, his large, dark eyes wide. "Mom, the man said—" "Quiet," Jenna commanded. Softer this time, but with an edge that made the boy snap his mouth shut. Mateo straightened up. He was tall, towering over her by nearly a foot. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes moving back to the boy. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Mateo frowned, a small crease appearing between his brows. He looked from the boy to Jenna, and then back to the boy. "What is his name?" Mateo asked. His voice was a low baritone, smooth like gravel rolling over velvet. It doesn't matter, Jenna said quickly, pulling Eli behind her legs. He's just a kid. We're leaving. I apologize for the disturbance, Mr. Velez. Mateo went still. You know who I am. Everyone knows who you are, she said, taking a step back. Come on. He has the Velez eyes, Mateo said. It was not a question. It was a statement, delivered with a terrifying calmness. Jenna felt the floor tilt beneath her. The air left her lungs. She had spent 6 years running from a past that was soaked in blood and betrayal. 6 years dyeing her hair and changing her name and paying cash for everything. She had thought she was safe here, hidden in the noise of the city. I don't know what you're talking about, Jenna said. Her voice trembled. Mateo took a step toward them. The casual elegance was gone, replaced by a predator's focus. He crouched down, balancing on the balls of his feet so he was eye level with Eli. The boy did not flinch. He stared back at the crime lord with a solemn intensity that mirrored the man's own. Look at him, Mateo murmured, seemingly to himself. He reached out, his hand hovering near Eli's face. Jenna flinched, her body tensing to strike, but Mateo only brushed a thumb over the boy's cheekbone. He looks like Gabriel. The name hit Jenna like a physical blow. Gabriel, the ghost she had been outrunning. He is not my son, Jenna blurted out. The lie hung in the air between them, gross and obvious. Mateo slowly stood up. He looked at Jenna, his expression shifting from curiosity to something colder, sharper. He looked at the protective way she shielded the boy with her body, the white-knuckled grip she had on the boy's jacket, the sheer desperation in her eyes. He's not your son? Mateo repeated softly. Then whose is he? I'm watching him, Jenna said. The lies were tumbling out now, clumsy and disjointed. For a friend, a neighbor. I just brought him along because his mom is sick. I have to go. She did not wait for his permission. She grabbed Eli's hand and turned, walking as fast as she could without breaking into a run. She expected a hand to clamp down on her shoulder. She expected a shout, a gunshot, the sound of security guards rushing her. But there was only silence. She rounded the corner and pushed through the service doors, the cool, damp night air hitting her face. She practically threw Eli into the passenger seat of her rusted sedan and scrambled into the driver's side. Her hands shook so badly she dropped her keys twice before jamming them into the ignition. As the engine sputtered to life, she glanced at the rearview mirror. The alley was empty, but high up, in one of the darkened windows of the club. She thought she saw a silhouette watching her, a shadow against the glass. "Mom?" Eli asked, his voice small. "Are you mad?" Jenna let out a shuddering breath, putting the car in gear and peeling out of the alleyway. "No, baby, I'm not mad, but we have to play the quiet game now, okay? The serious quiet game." Mateo Velez stood at the window of his office, watching the taillights of the battered sedan disappear into the rainy night. The glass was cold against his forehead. He could still feel the phantom sensation of the boy's skin against his thumb. The resemblance was uncanny. The shape of the eyes, the set of the jaw, the dark, brooding intelligence that seemed too heavy for a 6-year-old child. Gabriel was dead. He'd been dead for 7 years, buried in a plot that Mateo visited twice a year. But the boy... The door to his office opened. Silvio, his second-in-command, stepped in. "Boss, is there a problem?" Mateo turned away from the window. He walked to his desk and set the glass down with a decisive click. "The catering girl, the one with the dark hair." "Jenna?" Silvio asked. "She's just a waitress. She's been doing the Tuesday deliveries for a month." "Find out who she really is," Mateo said. His voice was devoid of emotion, but his eyes were burning. "She said the boy wasn't hers. She lied." Silvio nodded, knowing better than to ask why. "I'll put a tail on her." "Do it yourself," Mateo ordered. "I want to know where she goes, who she talks to, and where she sleeps." "And Silvio?" "Yeah, boss. If she tries to leave the city, stop her." Jenna did not go straight home. She drove in erratic loops through the industrial district, watching her mirrors with the paranoia of a hunted animal. She had been trained well. She knew how to spot a tail. For the first 20 minutes, there was nothing. Just the rain and the occasional taxi, But then she saw it, a black sedan, hanging 2 cars back, turning when she turned. It was professional, discreet. If she hadn't been looking for it, she never would have noticed. "Damn it," she whispered, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. They knew, or at least they suspected. Mateo Velez was not a man who let loose ends dangle. He had seen something in Eli, and now he was pulling the thread. She couldn't go to the apartment. That was the first rule. If you are compromised, you burn the safe house. But her passport was there. The emergency cash, $3,000 rolled into a coffee can in the freezer, was there, and Eli's inhaler was on the nightstand. She had to risk it. She took a sharp right turn, cutting through a gas station lot to gain a few seconds of lead time, and sped toward her building. It was a crumbling brick structure on the edge of the city, anonymous and dreary. She parked the car around the back, in the shadows of a dumpster. "Eli, listen to me," she said, unbuckling him. "We are going to play a game. We are going to run upstairs really fast, grab our bags, and then we are going on a trip. Okay?" "Where are we going?" Eli asked, rubbing his eyes. "Somewhere warm." She lied. "Let's go." She scooped him up, ignoring the burn in her arms, and ran up the 3 flights of stairs. Her key fumbled in the lock, scratching against the metal plate. She shoved the door open and locked it behind them, slamming the deadbolt home. The apartment was small and sparse. Jenna moved like a whirlwind. She dumped her duffel bag onto the bed and started throwing clothes in, jeans, sweaters, socks. She ran to the kitchen, grabbed the coffee can from the freezer, and dumped the cold rolls of cash into her purse. Her heart was thundering in her ears, drowning out the sound of the rain against the window. Flashback. 7 years ago. The warehouse smelled of copper and gasoline. Jenna was 19, huddled behind a stack of shipping crates, her hands pressed over her mouth to stifle her sobbing. She was pregnant, barely showing, but she could feel the life inside her fluttering in distress. "Find her!" a voice growled. It was a voice she had once loved, a voice that had whispered promises in the dark, but the man she loved was gone, consumed by the life he had chosen. The betrayal had been total. He hadn't just lied to her, he had used her. He had used them both as leverage against the Velez family. "She can't have gone far," another man said. "Mateo will kill us if we don't find her. Mateo doesn't have to know." The first voice said, "We clean up the mess. We bury the girl. We bury the kid. No witnesses." Jenna had squeezed her eyes shut, a prayer forming on her lips. She had to run, not for herself, but for the baby. If she stayed, they were both dead. She had slipped out the side door into the pouring rain, running until her lungs burned and her shoes fell apart. She had never looked back. End flashback. Jenna snapped the zipper of the duffel bag shut. The memory faded, leaving the cold taste of bile in her throat. She grabbed Eli's coat and knelt to button it up. "Mommy, you're shaking," Eli whispered, reaching out to touch her face. "I'm just cold, baby," she said, forcing a smile. "Okay, we're ready. We're gonna go down the fire escape, okay? It's an adventure." She stood up, slinging the heavy bag over her shoulder. She reached for the doorknob to check it one last time before they headed for the window. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was polite, rhythmic, and terrifying. Jenna froze. She stared at the door as if it were a bomb about to detonate. "Jenna!" a voice said from the other side. It was not shouting. It was calm, deep, and resonant. "Open the door." She backed away, pulling Eli with her. She looked at the window. The fire escape was old, rusted metal. It would clang. They would hear her. "I know you are in there," the voice said. "And I know you are packing. Don't make me kick it in. I don't want to scare the boy." She had no weapon. A kitchen knife wouldn't stop a man like Mateo Velez. She looked around desperately, but there was no way out. If he wanted to kill them, he could have shot through the door. He could have firebombed the apartment. He was talking. That meant he wanted something. "Stay here," she whispered to Eli, pointing to the corner of the room behind the sofa. "Do not move. Do not make a sound." Eli nodded, his eyes huge. He curled into a ball behind the couch. Jenna took a deep breath, smoothed her uniform, and unlocked the deadbolt. She opened the door. Mateo Velez filled the doorway. He had shed his suit jacket, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the tan skin of his throat. He was wet from the rain, droplets clinging to his dark hair. He did not have a gun in his hand. He looked at the duffel bag on the floor. He looked at the empty coffee can on the counter. Then he looked at her. "Going somewhere?" he asked dryly. "It's a free country," Jenna said, blocking the entrance with her body. "I can leave if I want. Not when you have something that belongs to me, Mateo said. He stepped forward. Jenna tried to hold her ground, but he simply walked past her, his shoulder brushing hers. He was warm, smelling of rain and cedar wood. He walked into the center of her small, shabby living room and looked around. "Where is he?" Mateo asked. Jenna turned to face him. "He's sleeping. Leave him alone." Mateo turned his head slowly, scanning the room. His eyes landed on the sofa. He walked toward it. "No!" Jenna lunged for him, grabbing his arm. It was like grabbing a steel beam. Mateo didn't even flinch. He simply caught her wrist in his hand, holding her effortlessly while he looked over the back of the couch. Eli was not sleeping, but he was pretending to be. He had curled up tight, eyes squeezed shut, just like they had practiced for the quiet game. Mateo stared down at the boy. The anger that had been rolling off him in waves seemed to dissipate, replaced by a profound, aching sadness. He looked at the curve of Eli's nose, the dark lashes against his pale cheeks. Jenna struggled against his grip. "Let go of me. He has nothing to do with you. You're wrong. He's just a kid." Mateo ignored her. He released her wrist and knelt beside the couch. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and brushed the hair back from Eli's forehead. The boy didn't move, though his breathing hitched. Mateo leaned in close. For a moment, Jenna thought he was going to whisper a threat. Instead, he pressed his lips softly to the boy's forehead. It was a gesture of reverence, a claim. He pulled back and looked at Eli, his voice barely a whisper, rough with emotion. "He has my brother's face." He stood up and turned to Jenna. The sadness vanished, replaced by a cold, iron resolve. "He's not your son," he said, mocking her earlier lie. "He is my son," Jenna cried, tears finally spilling over. "I gave birth to him. I raised him. I kept him alive while you and your people destroyed everything else." Mateo closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He towered over her, his presence consuming all the oxygen in the room. He looked down at her, his eyes burning with a possessive fire that terrified and mesmerized her. "He may be your blood," Mateo said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "But he's mine now." The words snapped something inside Jenna. The fear converted instantly into pure, white-hot rage. She didn't think so. She swung her hand and slapped him across the face. The sound cracked through the small apartment like a gunshot. Mateo's head snapped to the side. A red mark bloomed instantly on his cheekbone. He didn't strike back. He didn't yell. Slowly, he turned his face back to hers. He brought his hand up to touch his cheek, his eyes narrowing. There was no anger in them, only a dark, terrifying satisfaction. "You have fire," he murmured. "Good, you will need it." "Get out!" Jenna shook, her hand stinging. "Get out of my house!" "This isn't a request." "Jenna," Mateo said, stepping closer until she was backed up against the wall. He placed a hand on the wall beside her head, boxing her in. "You tried to run. You tried to hide him. That ends tonight. You can't keep us here," she spat. "I can do whatever I want," Mateo said softly. "And right now, what I want is the truth. You don't leave this city. You don't leave this apartment unless I say so. And if you try to run again—" He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. "If you try to run again, I will find you, and I won't be this polite next time." He pulled back, staring into her eyes, searching for the lie, searching for the ghost of the past. "Now," he said, crossing his arms over his chest, "start talking." The file on the mahogany desk was thin, dangerously thin. Mateo Valles sat in the high-backed leather chair of his study, the only light in the room coming from a brass banker's lamp that cast a pool of gold over the papers. He had resources that spanned the eastern seaboard. He had judges in his pocket, police captains on his payroll, and digital forensic experts who could pull deleted emails from a server that had been burned to ash. And yet, Jenna Rowe was a ghost. Silvio stood on the other side of the desk, looking uncomfortable. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the floorboards creaking under the silence. "This is it?" Mateo asked. His voice was quiet, which was always worse than him shouting. "She's good, boss," Silvio admitted, clearing his throat. "Her social security number belongs to a woman who died in 1998. No credit history prior to 6 years ago. No high school transcripts under that name. It is like she fell out of the sky 6 years ago with a baby in her arms." Mateo picked up the single grainy photograph clipped to the file. It was a surveillance shot taken 3 days ago. Jenna was walking out of the diner, her shoulders slumped, holding the boy's hand. She looked exhausted. She looked terrified. She looked beautiful. "She is running from something," Mateo murmured, dropping the photo back onto the desk. "Or someone. We found a birth certificate for the kid," Silvio added. "Eli Rowe, father listed as unknown. But the hospital records? Sealed, and not just regular sealed. It looks like a witness protection scrub, but messier, like someone did it in a hurry." Mateo leaned back, steepling his fingers. The mystery of Jenna Rowe was irritating, but the boy, Eli, was the piece of the puzzle that kept him awake at night. The resemblance was not just physical, it was in the eyes. Gabriel had that same intense, watchful stare before he died. "Bring the car around," Mateo said, standing up. "We are moving them tonight." "To the estate?" "No," Mateo said, buttoning his suit jacket. "Too far. Take them to the townhouse on 4th Street. Put a 4-man rotation on the perimeter. Nobody gets in or out without my approval." The townhouse was a gilded cage, but it was warmer than the drafty apartment on the south side. It had 3 floors, a limestone facade, and a security system that cost more than Jenna had earned in her entire life. Jenna stood in the center of the living room, her arms crossed over her chest. Her duffel bag sat on the Persian rug, looking cheap and out of place. "I'm not a prisoner," she said. Mateo stood by the fireplace. He had been watching her pace for the last 10 minutes. "You are safe. There is a difference." "Is there?" Jenna challenged. "You forced us out of my apartment. You made me quit my job. You have men with guns standing on the sidewalk. And you have a warm bed, a stocked fridge, and a guarantee that no one will snatch your son while you are sleeping," Mateo countered smoothly. He walked toward her, stopping just outside her personal space. "We have a deal. Jenna, you stay here until I find out who you really are. In exchange, I keep you alive." Jenna looked up at him. The anger in her eyes was warring with exhaustion. The deal had a condition. "Mateo." "I remember," he said, "and say it." She insisted. Mateo sighed, a sound of impatience mixed with resignation. "I will not involve the boy in the business. He sees nothing. He hears nothing. He is a civilian." "He is a child," Jenna corrected sharply. "He is my guest," Mateo said. "And so are you. The bedrooms are upstairs. The master suite is yours. Eli can take the room down the hall." "I will sleep in the same room as him," Jenna said quickly. Mateo's expression softened, just a fraction. He nodded. "Suit yourself. Get some sleep, Jenna." "You look like you are about to collapse." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was smaller now, stripped of its bravado. "Why do you care? If you don't believe he is your nephew, why are you doing this?" Mateo paused with his hand on the doorknob. He did not look back. "Because I don't believe in coincidences, and because nobody looks at a child the way you do unless they are afraid they are going to lose them." The days bled into a routine that was surprisingly domestic, though the undercurrent of danger never truly vanished. Jenna spent her mornings watching the street from behind the heavy velvet curtains, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But inside the townhouse, the atmosphere began to shift. Mateo was not there often during the day, but he came by every evening. He claimed it was to check on the security detail, but Jenna noticed he always arrived around dinner time. It was a Tuesday when Jenna walked into the library to find them together. The library was a massive room lined with books that smelled of old paper and lemon polish. A fire was crackling in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Sitting at a low coffee table were the two most important males in her life, though one was a stranger she should hate. Mateo was sitting on the floor, actually sitting on the expensive rug, in his dress shirt and slacks. Eli was opposite him, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. Between them sat an onyx and marble chess set. The horse moves in an L shape, Mateo was explaining, his voice low and patient. It is the only piece that can jump over others. It is useful for surprise attacks. I like the horse, Eli said solemnly, picking up the black knight. He looks strong. He is, Mateo agreed, but you have to be careful. If you move him too far out without support, he gets trapped. You always have to protect your pieces. Eli. Especially the king. Jenna leaned against the doorframe, her heart doing a traitorous flip in her chest. Mateo Velez was a man who ordered hits. He was a man who broke fingers and bribed politicians. Seeing him there, explaining the rules of a board game to her 6-year-old son with such gentle seriousness, made her chest ache. Mateo looked up, sensing her presence. He did not scramble to stand up or look embarrassed. He simply held her gaze. He learns fast, Mateo said. He has a strategic mind. He is 6, Jenna said, walking into the room. He likes the pieces because they are shiny. I like the strategy, Eli piped up. Defending his new friend, Mateo smirked, a genuine expression that transformed his face, taking years off his age. See, the boy has potential. Jenna sat on the edge of the sofa, watching them. I thought you were busy running the city. The city can wait, Mateo said, moving a white pawn. Silvio is handling the collections tonight. I needed a break from the noise. Is that what we are? Jenna asked quietly. A break. Mateo moved his gaze from the board to her face. The intensity was back, the dark, simmering heat that made her breath hitch. You're the only quiet thing I have, Jenna. The moment hung between them, fragile and heavy. Eli, oblivious to the tension, moved his knight and knocked over Mateo's bishop. Ha! Eli cheered. I got you! Mateo chuckled, the sound rich and warm. So you did. Good move. Jenna looked away, her hands twisting together in her lap. She was lying to him, every day. She looked him in the eye and lied about the boy who was laughing at his feet. The guilt was a physical weight in her stomach, acidic and burning, but the truth was dangerous. If Mateo knew that Eli really was Gabriel's son, that he was the heir to the Velez Empire, he would never let them go. The peace shattered 3 nights later. It was past midnight. The rain had returned, hammering against the roof of the townhouse like bullets. Jenna was in the kitchen, unable to sleep, making a cup of tea. The house was silent, save for the storm outside. Then, the back door opened. Jenna spun around, dropping the teaspoon into the sink with a clatter. Mateo stumbled in. He was soaking wet, his black trench coat heavy with water, but it was the way he moved that terrified her. He was favoring his left side, his breathing ragged and harsh. Mateo? Jenna whispered. He looked up. His face was pale, his hair plastered to his forehead. There was a streak of blood on his cheekbone, and his knuckles were raw and split. Go back to bed, he rasped, leaning heavily against the granite island. You're hurt, Jenna said, rushing toward him. It's nothing, he grunted, trying to wave her away. Just a scratch, a misunderstanding in the South Ward. A misunderstanding doesn't make you bleed, Jenna said. She reached him, her hands hovering over his coat. Take it off. Jenna, take it off, Mateo, she ordered, her voice firm. He stared at her for a second, surprised by her tone, then nodded once. He shrugged out of the heavy coat, wincing as the movement pulled at his side, beneath it. His white dress shirt was stained crimson at the ribs. Jenna hissed in a breath. Sit down now! She pushed him toward one of the bar stools. He sat, his posture slumping slightly. Jenna moved into high gear. She grabbed the first aid kit she kept under the sink, a habit from her life on the run, and a clean towel. This is going to sting, she warned, unbuttoning his shirt. The wound was a graze, likely from a knife or a bullet that had missed its mark by inches. It was ugly and angry, but it wasn't deep enough to need a hospital. Jenna worked in silence, cleaning the blood with antiseptic wipes, her hands steady despite the trembling in her knees. Matteo watched her. He watched the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way her lower lip was caught between her teeth. He could smell her scent, vanilla and soap, over the metallic tang of blood and rain. "You've done this before," Matteo observed quietly. Jenna paused, her hand resting on his bare chest. "I have had to patch up a few scrapes in my life. Not like this," Matteo said. "You have steady hands. You're not afraid of the blood." "I'm terrified of the blood," Jenna whispered, applying a sterile bandage to his side. "I just don't let it stop me." She smoothed the tape down, her fingers lingering on his skin. His skin was hot, burning against her cool fingertips. She realized, suddenly, how close they were. She was standing between his spread knees, her face inches from his. She looked up. Matteo was staring at her with an expression that stopped her heart. It wasn't gratitude. It was hunger. It was a raw, desperate need that mirrored the chaos she felt inside herself. "Jenna," he breathed. The air in the kitchen grew thick, charged with an electricity that drowned out the storm outside. Jenna knew she should step back. She knew this man was dangerous, that he was the reason she had been running for 6 years. She knew he could destroy her, but she didn't move. Matteo reached up, his hand cupping the back of her neck. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, tilting her face up. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his eyes searching hers. "I can't," she admitted, the words barely a ghost of a sound. He pulled her down. The kiss was not gentle. It tasted of rain and copper and desperation. It was a collision, a release of all the tension that had been building between them since that first night in the alley. Matteo groaned low in his throat, his other arm wrapping around her waist to pull her flush against him. Jenna gripped his shoulders, her fingers digging into the muscle, anchoring herself as the world spun away. For a moment, there was no Mafia, no lies, no past. There was only the heat of his mouth, the strength of his arms, and the overwhelming realization that she had wanted this, wanted him longer than she dared to admit. Then, a floorboard creaked upstairs. The sound was like a bucket of ice water. They broke apart, gasping, their chests heaving. Jenna stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. Her lips felt swollen, bruised. Matteo remained seated, his eyes blown wide, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He looked at the ceiling, toward where Eli was sleeping, and then back at Jenna. The reality of who they were and what stood between them crashed back into the room. Jenna stammered. "I have to go. I have to check on Eli." She turned and fled the kitchen, leaving Matteo sitting alone in the dark, the taste of her still on his lips, the blood drying on his side. The next morning, the tension was a physical wall between them. Matteo had left before sunrise, leaving a note that he had business to attend to. Jenna moved through the townhouse like a ghost, avoiding the kitchen, avoiding the memories, but the world outside did not care about their confused hearts. In a warehouse on the other side of the city, the leader of the rival Russo syndicate was looking at a report. "You are sure?" Dante Russo asked, tapping a cigar against a crystal ashtray. "Dead sure," his lieutenant said. "Velez has a woman and a kid stashed at the 4th Street safe house. He visits every night. He's playing house. Dante." Dante smiled, a slow, shark-like expression. "Matteo Velez does not have a family. He has liabilities. If he is protecting this kid, it means the kid matters. And if the kid matters, we can use him. What do you want to do?" "Rattle the cage," Dante said. "See how hard he bites." Jenna was in the garage of the townhouse later that afternoon. She needed to get Eli's spare asthma inhaler from the car. She had forgotten to bring it inside during the initial panic of moving. The garage was secure, monitored by cameras, but as she knelt by the rear bumper of her sedan to tie her shoelace, something caught her eye. Attached to the underside of the chassis, just behind the muffler, was a small, black box. It blinked with a faint red light. Jenna froze. She knew what that was. She had seen one before, years ago, on the night Gabriel had told her to run. A GPS tracker, her breath hitched. She reached out with trembling fingers and pried the magnetic device loose. It was cold and heavy in her palm. "Jenna?" She jumped, spinning around. Mateo was standing in the doorway of the garage. He had just arrived, flanked by 2 of his guards. He saw the object in her hand instantly. His face went stone cold. "Give me that," he commanded. Walking toward her, Jenna handed it to him. Mateo inspected it, turning it over in his hands. He looked at the blinking light, his jaw clenching until a muscle feathered in his cheek. "This is active," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "How long has this been here?" "I don't know," Jenna whispered. "Since the club, maybe before." Mateo looked at his guards. "Sweep the perimeter. Now, call in the B team. We are compromised." The guards scrambled. Mateo turned back to Jenna, and this time, there was no softness, no chess-playing patience. There was only the dawn of the Valles family. He grabbed her arm, not hurtfully but with enough force to make her understand the gravity of the situation. He marched her out of the garage and into the secure hallway of the house. "Mateo, you're hurting me," she said. He pinned her with a look. "Someone tagged your car. Jenna, that means they know where you have been. They know you are here. They know about the boy." He held up the black box. "This isn't a standard police issue. This is cartel tech. This is professional." He stepped closer, backing her against the wall. "I asked you before, and you gave me half-truths. You told me you were hiding from a bad ex-boyfriend. You told me it was personal." Jenna swallowed hard, her throat dry. "This isn't a boyfriend," Mateo snarled. "This is a hit squad. Who is hunting you, Jenna?" "I can't tell you," she pleaded. "If I tell you, you'll kill him. You'll start a war." "I am already at war," Mateo roared, his voice echoing off the walls. "They came for me last night. They tagged your car. They are circling us like wolves, and I am fighting blind because you won't give me the ammunition I need." He slammed his hand against the wall beside her head, making her flinch. "Tell me," he demanded, "who is the father? Who is hunting the boy?" Jenna looked at him, seeing the fear beneath his rage. He wasn't angry because of the disrespect. He was angry because he was terrified he couldn't protect them. She slumped, the fight draining out of her. She couldn't do this alone anymore. The tracker proved that. Her running days were over. "It wasn't just a bad boyfriend," Jenna whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. "It was the Santoro family." Mateo went still. The Santoros were a small outfit that had been wiped out 7 years ago, or so everyone thought. "And the father?" Mateo asked, his voice dropping to a hush. Jenna closed her eyes. She could still feel the ghost of the kiss from the night before. She knew that what she was about to say would change everything. It would destroy the delicate trust they had built. "His name," Jenna said, her voice trembling, "was Gabriel Velez." Mateo stepped back as if he had been physically struck. The color drained from his face. "My brother," he whispered. Jenna opened her eyes and looked at him. "Eli is your nephew, Mateo. He's the heir you thought was dead." The silence that followed was deafening. Mateo looked at her, then toward the stairs where Eli was playing, and finally back to the tracker in his hand. The betrayal was clear on his face, but so was the dawning realization of the target painted on the boy's back. "You lied to me," he said, his voice hollow. "I lied to save him," Jenna replied. Mateo gripped the tracker until the plastic casing cracked in his hand. He looked at her with eyes that were suddenly very old and very tired. "You didn't save him," Mateo said grimly. "You just brought the war to my doorstep." The silence in the hallway was heavy, suffocating under the weight of the revelation. Mateo stood perfectly still, the broken plastic of the tracking device cutting into his palm, but he did not seem to feel it. He was looking at Jenna, but his mind was 7 years in the past, reconstructing the night his brother died. "Gabriel," Mateo said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "Gabriel was killed in a botched robbery. That was the police report." "That was what we were told. It was not a robbery," Jenna said, her voice gaining strength now that the secret was out. She stepped away from the wall, wrapping her arms around herself as if to hold her shattering composure together. It was an execution. Matteo motioned for her to follow him into the study, away from the open hallway where his guards were pacing. He shut the heavy oak door and locked it. "Tell me," he commanded. "Everything." Jenna sat on the edge of the leather sofa, her hands trembling. Gabriel wanted out. Matteo. He didn't want this life. He didn't want the Valles legacy. He fell in with the Santoro crew, not because he wanted to be a criminal, but because they promised him protection if he helped them liquidate their assets and disappear. He was going to take me with him. Matteo paced to the window, staring out at the rain-slicked street. The Santoros were bottom feeders, small-time hustlers. They were desperate, Jenna corrected. And desperation makes people dangerous. There was a deal happening that night, a handover of territory, but someone tipped off the police, and someone else tipped off a rival faction. It was a slaughter. Gabriel shoved me into a utility closet just before the shooting started. He told me to run. He told me that if I stayed, the cops would bury me to hide their own corruption, and the shooters would kill me to leave no witnesses. She looked up at Matteo's back. "I heard the shots. Matteo, I heard him fall. I was 19, pregnant and terrifyingly alone. So I ran. I changed my name. I moved cities every 6 months. I became a ghost because I knew that if anyone found out I was carrying Gabriel Velez's son, we would be pawns in a game I didn't know how to play." Matteo turned around. His face was a mask of controlled fury, but his eyes held a depth of pain Jenna had never seen before. "You should have come to me." "I didn't know you," Jenna countered. "All I knew was that the Valles family was dangerous, and Gabriel was dead. I couldn't risk Eli." Matteo looked at the ceiling, exhaling a long, shaky breath. The reality of the situation was settling in. The boy upstairs was not just a random child with a familiar face. He was the last remnant of the brother Matteo had failed to save. The danger was no longer theoretical. It was in their blood. "You were right," Matteo said quietly. "To run. If you had come to the family, then in the chaos. I do not know if I could have protected you." The atmosphere in the townhouse shifted from a temporary shelter to a fortress under siege. Matteo doubled the guard. He had bulletproof glass installed on the ground floor windows. He stopped going to the club, running his empire from the study while keeping a hawk-like watch over Jenna and Eli. The threat manifested 3 nights later. It was 2 a.m. The wind was howling outside, rattling the window panes. Jenna was asleep in the guest room. Eli curled up beside her. When the alarm system screamed, it wasn't a false trigger. It was the perimeter breach alert. Jenna bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs, before she could even swing her legs out of bed. The door burst open. Matteo was there. He held a suppressed pistol in his right hand, his eyes scanning the room with lethal precision. He was dressed in black tactical gear, a stark contrast to his usual tailored suits. "Get down," he ordered, his voice low and urgent. "What is it?" Jenna gasped, shielding Eli, who was waking up with a whimper. "Breach at the south gate. 2 intruders. My men are engaging, but we are moving. Now." He didn't wait for her to argue. He crossed the room, scooped Eli up into his left arm as if the boy weighed nothing, and grabbed Jenna's hand with his free fingers. His grip was iron. "Stay behind me. Do not let go." They moved into the hallway. The sound of shouting came from downstairs, followed by the muffled pop of gunfire. Jenna felt terror clawing at her throat, but Matteo was a solid, immovable force in front of her. He led them not to the stairs, but to a panel at the end of the hall. He punched in a code, and the wall slid back to reveal a narrow, steel-lined panic room. He ushered them inside. The space was small, lined with monitors and supplies. He set Eli down on a cot in the corner. "It's okay, little man," Matteo said, his voice surprisingly gentle despite the chaos. "Just a drill. Put on these headphones." He handed Eli a pair of noise-canceling headphones. Eli, wide-eyed and pale, nodded and put them on. Matteo turned to the monitors. On the grainy black-and-white screens, Jenna saw shadows moving across the lawn. She saw flashes of light, muzzle flares. "They found us," she whispered, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "They found us again." Mateo turned from the screen and looked at her. He holstered his weapon and stepped closer, closing the distance until he was crowding her space. He saw the panic in her eyes, the way she was hyperventilating. "Look at me," he said. Jenna looked up. "They did not get in," Mateo said firmly. "My men stopped them at the wall. You are safe. I have you." "For how long?" Jenna cried softly, a tear escaping. "This never ends. Mateo, it never ends." "It ends when I say it ends," he vowed. The adrenaline was coursing through both of them, a high-voltage current that blurred the line between fear and desire. Jenna looked at him, this dangerous, violent man who was the only thing standing between her family and death. She saw the bruise on his jaw from the fight days ago. She saw the fierce, protective fire in his eyes. Without thinking, she reached out and gripped the lapels of his tactical vest. She needed to feel that he was real. She needed an anchor. Mateo froze at her touch. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The restraint he had been exercising for weeks snapped. He reached out, tangling one hand in her hair and the other around her waist, pulling her flush against him. "Jenna," he groaned, a warning and a plea all at once. "Don't talk," she whispered. "Just hold me." He kissed her. It wasn't like the first time in the kitchen. That had been desperate and confused. This was deliberate. It was a claim. Mateo kissed her with a slow, burning intensity that made her knees weak. He tasted mint and danger. His lips moved over hers with a demanding pressure, asking for permission and taking it when she sighed into his mouth. Jenna wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, trying to fuse their bodies together. The fear of the gunfire outside dissolved, replaced by the overwhelming heat of the man holding her. He made her feel small and protected, cherished and devoured all at once. His hands roamed over her back, learning the curve of her spine, treating her like something precious that he was terrified to break but unable to let go of. He pulled back just an inch, his forehead resting against hers, their breath mingling in the small, quiet room. "I will burn this city to the ground before I let them touch you," he whispered against her lips. The promise was dark, absolute, and terrifyingly romantic. Jenna ran her thumb over his cheekbone. "I know." They stood there in the dim light of the panic room, wrapped in each other's arms, while the storm of violence raged outside, for the first time in 6 years. Jenna did not feel like running. She felt like she had finally stopped. Morning light filtered into the townhouse kitchen, bright and oblivious to the horrors of the night before. The breach had been contained. The intruders had been neutralized or had fled. Jenna stood at the stove, making pancakes. Her movements were mechanical, her mind still replaying the feeling of Mateo's hands on her skin. Mateo sat at the island, nursing a black coffee. He was back in a crisp white shirt, though he looked tired. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but it was thick with unspoken questions. Eli walked into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, clutching a stuffed bear. He climbed onto the stool next to Mateo. "Mr. Mateo," Eli asked, his voice raspy with sleep. Mateo turned, his expression softening instantly. "Good morning, Eli." "Did you sleep here?" Eli asked, looking at Mateo's coffee cup. Mateo hesitated. He looked at Jenna. She froze, the spatula hovering over the pan. "Yes," Mateo said simply. "Why?" Eli asked. "To protect us?" Mateo set his cup down. He looked at the boy, his brother's son, his blood. "Yes, to protect you." "Okay," Eli said, accepting this logic effortlessly. "Can I have chocolate chips in mine?" Jenna turned back to the stove, blinking back sudden tears. Her heart broke a little. Not out of sadness, but out of fear. Eli was already looking at Mateo like a father figure. He felt safe. And Mateo was looking at Eli like a son. She was terrified. She had spent her life being the only shield Eli had. Now, she was sharing that burden. And with it, she was losing the total control she had maintained for so long. If she let Mateo in, fully in, there was no going back. And if he died, like Gabriel had, she didn't think she could survive the loss a second time. Later that morning, while Eli was watching cartoons, Mateo found Jenna in the hallway. "We need to talk about the future," he said. "I don't know if we have one," Jenna replied, guarding her heart. "We do," Matteo insisted. "I have been looking into the legalities. Custody, adoption." Jenna whipped her head around. "Adoption? It is the only way to make him untouchable," Matteo argued. "If he is a Valles by law, he has the protection of the entire organization. No one touches the family. It would secure his inheritance. It would ensure his safety." "Is that all this is?" Jenna asked, her voice trembling. "A business transaction securing an heir?" Matteo stepped closer, his dark eyes searching hers. "You know it isn't. I look at him, and I see the years I lost. I see the brother I couldn't save, but I also see him. He is smart. He's kind. I want to be the one who teaches him how to be a man, not because of duty, but because—" He trailed off, struggling with the vulnerability. "Because you love him," Jenna finished softly. Matteo nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "And I care about his mother." Jenna looked down. "I am scared, Matteo. If you adopt him, he is part of your world, forever." "He was born into this world." "Jenna," Matteo said grimly. "We are just deciding who holds the weapon standing in front of him." That afternoon, Matteo retreated to his study. The attack the previous night had been too precise. The intruders knew exactly which gate had the weakest sensor. They knew the rotation of the guards. It was an inside job. He pulled out the file Jenna had given him, the few scraps of paper she had saved from Gabriel. Among them was an old bank transfer slip Gabriel had kept, perhaps as insurance. It was the payout from the Santoro job that went wrong. Matteo cross-referenced the date with his own family's ledger from 7 years ago. He had been a capo then, not the Don. His father had been ill. The organization had been run by a council of lieutenants. He traced the routing number on the transfer slip. It was a shell company, one used for cleaning problematic assets. He typed in the authorization code for the account. It required a biometric override, which he provided. The screen flickered, then populated with a name. The person who had authorized the transfer, the person who had paid the Santoros to set up the ambush. The person who had effectively signed Gabriel's death warrant was not a rival. It wasn't a cop. It was a Velez. Matteo stared at the screen, his blood turning to ice. The name on the ledger belonged to Christian, his father's advisor, the man who had taught Matteo how to shoot, the man who sat at his right hand during Sunday dinners, the man who was currently in charge of the Western Territory. Christian had orchestrated the hit to wipe out the Santoros, and when he realized Gabriel was involved, he hadn't called it off. He had let it happen. He had sacrificed Matteo's brother to secure a minor territory dispute, and now, 7 years later, Christian was the one feeding information to the threats outside. He was trying to finish the job. He needed Jenna and Eli dead because they were the only loose ends that could prove his treason. Matteo stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. A cold, lethal fury settled over him. He picked up the phone on his desk. "Get the car," he told Silvio, "and bring the heavy squad." He hung up and walked out of the study. He found Jenna in the living room, reading to Eli. She looked up, seeing the darkness on his face, and closed the book. "What is it?" she asked, sensing the shift in the air. "We're leaving," Matteo said. "The townhouse isn't safe." "Why?" Jenna asked, standing up. "Matteo, talk to me, because the call is coming from inside the house," Matteo said, his voice vibrating with suppressed rage. "I know who sold you out 7 years ago. I know who killed Gabriel." He walked over and placed a hand on Eli's head, then looked at Jenna with eyes that promised violence. "It was one of my own, and I'm going to make him regret the day he was born." The Blackwood estate was a sprawling expanse of stone and timber hidden deep within the valleys north of the city, surrounded by acres of pine forest that whispered in the wind. It was a fortress disguised as a sanctuary. Here, the air did not smell of exhaust and rain. It smelled of pine needles and damp earth. For the first time in 6 years. Jenna Rose stopped looking over her shoulder every time a twig snapped. Matteo had brought them here immediately after the revelation in the study. He had locked down the city operations, initiating a silent, brutal purge to root out the rot within his organization. But he did it from a distance. Physically, he was here, with them. The change in him was palpable. In the city, Matteo was a loaded weapon, tense, cold, ready to fire. Here, the steel in his spine seemed to relax, if only by a fraction. Jenna stood on the back porch, a mug of coffee warming her hands, watching them. Down by the private lake, the morning mist was still clinging to the water's surface. Matteo was standing on the wooden dock, his suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, beside him. Eli held a fishing rod that looked comically large in his small hands. "You have to wait." She heard Matteo's voice carry over the water. It was deep and patient. "The fish can feel the vibration of the line. If you pull too soon, you lose him. If you wait too long, he swallows the hook and suffers. You have to feel the moment." Eli looked up at him with hero worship shining in his eyes. "Like chess. Exactly like chess," Matteo agreed. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, adjusting his stance. "Steady. Breathe." Jenna felt a lump form in her throat. It was a domestic tableau she had never let herself dream of. For years, her life had been about survival. It had been about cash payments, fake names, and sleeping with one eye open. She had never imagined she would see her son learning to fish from the most dangerous man in the state, nor that she would feel safer in that moment than she ever had in her life. That evening, the house felt different. The staff had been dismissed for the night, leaving the three of them alone in the cavernous kitchen. Jenna, driven by a sudden need to contribute, to create something warm in this cold world, had taken over the stove. She made a simple pasta dish, the kind her mother used to make before the world went wrong. The smell of garlic and basil filled the air, replacing the sterile scent of the cleaning products the staff used. They ate at the small island rather than the long, imposing dining table. Matteo poured wine. Eli chattered endlessly about the fish he almost caught, his mouth stained with tomato sauce. Matteo listened to every word, nodding seriously, treating Eli's 6-year-old ramblings with the same gravity he gave his captains. When she put Eli to bed, the boy was asleep before his head hit the pillow, exhausted by the fresh air and the excitement. Jenna walked back downstairs to find Matteo standing by the fireplace in the living room, staring into the flames. "He's happy here," Matteo said without turning around. "He is," Jenna admitted, walking closer. "He needs a father. Matteo, I tried to be everything for him, but he needs this." Matteo turned. The firelight cast dancing shadows across the sharp planes of his face. "And you? What do you need?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. Jenna looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the burden of the war he was fighting to keep them safe. She saw the man who had kissed her son's forehead and claimed him as his own. "I need to stop running," she whispered. Matteo crossed the distance between them. He did not touch her. Not yet. He stopped inches away, his heat radiating toward her. "Then stop." "You are here. You are with me." "For how long?" Jenna asked, her voice trembling. "Until the war is over? Until you realize we are in too much trouble?" "Until the end," Matteo vowed. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed over her bottom lip, and Jenna felt her resolve shatter. The fear that had been her constant companion for years dissolved, replaced by a desperate, aching need. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "Matteo," he kissed her. It was not like the kiss in the panic room, which had been fueled by adrenaline and terror. This was slow. It was a question and an answer. He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her waist, lifting her slightly so she was flush against his chest. Jenna buried her hands in his dark hair, pulling him closer. She let herself go. She let herself be Jenna, not the fugitive, not the mother, just a woman who wanted this man. They moved together up the stairs, the world narrowing down to the sound of their breathing and the feel of skin on skin. In the sanctuary of the master bedroom, with the moonlight spilling across the sheets, Matteo treated her as if she were made of glass. He was a man capable of terrible violence, yet his hands were reverent, worshipful. He undressed her slowly, kissing every inch of skin he exposed, murmuring things in Italian that she didn't understand but felt in her marrow. When they finally came together, it was raw and emotional, a desperate clinging in the dark. Jenna cried out, not from pain, but from the sheer relief of being held, of being owned, of being loved without fear. "I have you," he whispered against her neck, his arms locking around her like iron bands. "I have you. Jenna, I am never letting you go." She fell asleep wrapped in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart. Morning arrived with a pale, gray light. Jenna woke up reaching for him, but the other side of the bed was cold. She sat up, pulling the sheet around her, a sudden spike of panic hitting her chest, but then she saw it, a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper sitting on the nightstand, weighed down by his watch. She picked it up. It was handwritten, the script sharp and angular. "Jenna, I have gone to the perimeter to check the new rotation. I will be back for breakfast. I left this for you. I started the process 3 days ago. If the worst happens, if I fail to hold the line, or if this war takes me, you need to know that he is safe. The lawyers have the originals. This makes Eli my legal son. It makes him a Velez. It grants him the trust, the protection, and the name. No one can touch him without answering to the entire organization, even from the grave. I will shield him. Yours." Jenna stared at the letter, her hands shaking. He wasn't just adopting Eli to create an heir. He was preparing for his own death. He was ensuring that if he died protecting them, Eli would not be left destitute and hunted like she had been. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed the letter to her chest, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his sacrifice. He was willing to die for a boy he had met 2 weeks ago. Suddenly, the silence of the morning was shattered. A deafening crack echoed from the woods, the unmistakable sound of a high-caliber rifle. Jenna froze for a heartbeat, the letter crumpling in her fist. Then, the instinct that had kept her alive for 6 years kicked in. "Eli!" she gasped. She scrambled out of bed, not bothering with clothes, grabbing Mateo's discarded dress shirt and pulling it on as she ran into the hallway. Downstairs, glass shattered. The heavy oak front doors blew inward with a concussive boom. "Secure the assets!" a voice screamed from the foyer. Not Mateo's voice. Jenna sprinted into Eli's room. He was sitting up in bed, clutching his bear, eyes wide with terror. "Mommy? Under the bed," Jenna hissed, sliding across the floor. "Now, Eli, go!" She shoved him underneath the heavy wooden frame and rolled under with him, pulling the duvet down to hide them. She held her hand over his mouth, her own heart hammering so hard she thought it would break her ribs. Boots thundered on the stairs. Heavy, tactical boots. "Check the rooms. The boss wants the girl alive, but the kid is expendable." The words made Jenna's blood run cold. The kid is expendable. The door to Eli's room was kicked open. Jenna squeezed her eyes shut, curling her body around Eli's small form in the dark, dusty space under the bed. She saw a pair of black combat boots walk into the room. They stopped inches from her face, separated only by the hanging bedskirt. "Clear!" a man shouted. The boots turned. They were leaving. Then Eli's asthma kicked in. A high, wheezing whistle escaped his chest. The boots stopped. The man slowly turned back. The barrel of a rifle lifted the bedskirt. Jenna looked up into the cold, dead eyes of a mercenary wearing a balaclava. "Found them." The man grinned. He reached down, grabbing Jenna by the hair. She screamed, clawing at his gloves, kicking out. He dragged her out from under the bed, throwing her against the wall. "Run! Eli!" she screamed. The man aimed his rifle at the boy, who was scrambling backward, but before he could pull the trigger, the window behind the man exploded inward. Mateo Velez came through the shattered glass like a vengeful god. He didn't have a gun. He didn't need one. He tackled the mercenary, driving him into the floor with a bone-crunching impact. Jenna watched, horrified and mesmerized, as Mateo moved with a speed that was barely human. He twisted the man's rifle away, reversed the grip, and used the stock to shatter the attacker's jaw. It was brutal, efficient, and absolutely silent. Mateo stood up, heaving, his white t-shirt stained with grass and blood. He looked at Jenna, his eyes wild. "Are you hurt?" he roared. "No!" she sobbed, crawling toward Eli. "Stay here," Mateo commanded. He picked up the mercenary's rifle. "Do not move." He turned and walked into the hallway. Jenna clutched Eli, covering his ears as the sounds of a massacre echoed through the house. It was short. It was violent. And then there was silence. 10 minutes later, Jenna walked downstairs, holding Eli's hand. She had to leave. She couldn't stay in that room. The foyer was a ruin. Splinters of wood and glass covered the floor. Mateo was standing near the open front doors. 2 of his loyal guards were dragging bodies away, but in the center of the room, on his knees, was one man. He was bleeding, his hands zip-tied behind his back. He was wearing a Valles security uniform. "I trusted you," Mateo said. His voice was terrifyingly soft. "They paid me," the guard wheezed, spitting blood. "Christian said you were weak. He said you were risking everything for a whore and a bastard." Jenna stopped on the landing. She should have covered Eli's eyes. She should have turned back, but she was frozen. Mateo didn't yell. He didn't monologue. He simply raised the pistol he was holding and shot the man in the chest. The guard slumped over. Jenna gasped. The sound was loud in the sudden silence. Mateo spun around. The look on his face was one she would never forget. It wasn't the look of the man who had made love to her hours ago. It wasn't the man who taught Eli to fish. It was the monster the city feared. His face was splattered with blood, his eyes void of humanity. He looked at the dead traitor, then up at Jenna. He saw the horror on her face. He saw the way she pulled Eli behind her leg. He holstered the gun and walked toward the stairs. He stopped 3 steps below her, looking up. He reeked of gunpowder and death. "Take the boy upstairs," he said to Jenna. "Pack a bag." "Mateo," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Do it," he shouted, the anger finally breaking through. Jenna scrambled upstairs. She packed frantically, her hands fumbling with zippers. When she came back down 10 minutes later, Mateo was standing by the front door. The bodies were gone. The blood had been hastily wiped away, but the copper smell lingered. "The car is waiting," Mateo said coldly. "The driver will take you to the airfield. There is a plane fueled and ready. It will take you to France. I have an account there in your name. Enough money to live for 3 lifetimes. Jenna stared at him. "You're sending us away?" "Look at me." "Jenna," Mateo snarled, gesturing to his blood-stained shirt. "Look at what I am. I bring death. I brought this to your doorstep. I let a traitor into the house where my son sleeps." "You saved us," Jenna argued. "This time," Mateo countered. "What about next time? Christian is coming." "The whole council is turning. If you stay, you die. I cannot watch you die." He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "I am poison, Jenna. I thought I could have this life, but I can't. I am a killer, and you are light. I will put you out." "You love us," she said, tears streaming down her face. "That is why you have to go," Mateo said. He looked at Eli, who was watching him with wide, tear-filled eyes. Mateo couldn't bring himself to touch the boy. He looked at his own hands, stained with violence. "Go, now, before I change my mind." He turned his back on them. Jenna grabbed the handle of her suitcase. She looked at Mateo's rigid back. She knew he was right. This life was insanity. She had spent 6 years running from exactly this. She should take the ticket. She should take the money and go to France and never look back. "Come on, Eli," she said, her voice hollow. She took a step toward the door. Eli didn't move. "Eli, come on," she urged, tugging his hand. Eli pulled his hand away. "No," the boy said. Jenna stopped. "Eli, we have to go." "No," Eli said louder. He dropped his stuffed bear. He walked past Jenna, toward the man standing in the middle of the ruins. "Eli!" Jenna cried. Eli walked right up to Mateo's back. He reached out and grabbed Mateo's hand, the hand that had just pulled a trigger. Mateo flinched as if he had been burned. He turned around, looking down at the boy with a mixture of horror and heartbreak. "Eli," Mateo choked out, "go with your mother. You said you would teach me to fish. Eli said, his chin trembling. Mateo stammered. I can't. You have to go. I don't want to go, Eli cried, tears finally spilling over. I don't want to run anymore. Mom is always scared when we run. She wasn't scared here. Not until the bad men came. Eli hugged Mateo's leg, burying his face in the blood-stained denim. Please don't make us go. I want you to be my dad. The silence that followed was absolute. Jenna dropped the suitcase. She watched Mateo crumble. The ruthless Don of Corvale City dropped to his knees in the middle of the broken glass. He wrapped his arms around the boy, burying his face in Eli's neck, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He held the boy tight, rocking him back and forth. Jenna walked over. She knelt beside them. She didn't care about the blood. She didn't care about the danger. She reached out and placed her hand on Mateo's shoulder. He looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed and raw. I will destroy you, he warned weakly. No, Jenna whispered, leaning her forehead against his. You will protect us. We are not going anywhere. Mateo, if they want a war, let them come. But we fight them together. Mateo looked at her, then at the boy in his arms. The darkness in his eyes didn't disappear, but something else joined it, a resolve. A terrifying, cold resolve that was far more dangerous than his rage. Okay, he whispered. Okay. He stood up, lifting Eli with him. He looked at Jenna, and the soldier was back. But this time, he wasn't fighting for territory. He was fighting for them. We don't run, Mateo said, his voice hard as stone. We go back to the city, and we will finish this. The return to Corvale City was not a homecoming. It was an infiltration. The penthouse at the top of the Valles Tower was supposed to be the safest place in the city, but to Jenna Rowe, it felt like the bridge of a sinking ship. The windows offered a panoramic view of the skyline, a grid of lights that Mateo Velez used to own, block by block. Now, those lights looked like warning flares. Mateo had spent the last 48 hours in a cold, silent rage. He had traced the money, he had traced the leaks. All roads led to one man, Christian. He was not just a lieutenant, he was Mateo's godfather. He was the man who had sat at the head of the table when Mateo's father died, guiding the transition of power. He had held Mateo's shoulder at Gabriel's funeral. The betrayal was not just business, it was a rot in the foundation of Mateo's soul. He will not meet with me, Mateo said, pacing the length of the living room. He knows I know. He has gone to ground. He won't meet with you, Jenna said, standing by the fireplace. She was dressed in black, her face pale but her eyes hard. But he will meet with me. Mateo stopped. He looked at her with a mixture of admiration and terror. No, I'm not using you as bait. He thinks I am the weak link, Jenna argued, stepping forward. He thinks I am just the girl who got knocked up and ran away. He thinks I'm terrified of you. If I call him, if I tell him I want to cut a deal to save Eli, he will come. It is too dangerous, Mateo snapped. We are already in danger, Jenna shouted back, her voice cracking. Mateo, look at us. We are trapped in this tower. Eli is watching cartoons in a panic room. If we don't end this tonight, we never will. Mateo stared at her. He saw the same fire in her eyes that he had seen that first night in her apartment when she slapped him. She was not asking for permission. She was telling him the plan. He walked over to her, gripping her shoulders. If he touches you, I will tear the world apart. He won't, Jenna whispered, because you're going to be right there. The meeting was set for midnight at an abandoned textile factory in the industrial district, neutral ground, or as neutral as it could get in a war zone. The rain was falling again, a relentless drizzle that slicked the cobblestones. Jenna stood in the center of the factory floor, the machinery cast long, skeletal shadows against the brick walls. She wore a heavy wool coat, her hands shoved deep into her pockets to hide their trembling. Underneath the coat, taped to her sternum, was a wire transmitting audio to the van parked 3 blocks away. A heavy metal door creaked open. Christian walked in when he was an older man, 60 years old, with silver hair and a grandfatherly face that masked a shark's nature. He was flanked by 2 bodyguards, but he waved them back. He wanted to savor this. Jenna, Christian said, his voice echoing in the vast space. You look just like you did 7 years ago. Scared, lost. I want out, Jenna said, projecting her voice so the microphone would catch it. Mateo is out of control. He's going to get us all killed. I just want to take my son and leave. Christian smiled, a pitying expression that made Jenna's skin crawl. He walked closer, his footsteps heavy on the concrete. Mateo was always emotional, like his father. He lacks the stomach for the hard choices. Is that why you betrayed him? Jenna asked. Is that why you sold out Gabriel? Christian stopped 10 feet away. He sighed, as if bored by the accusation. Gabriel was a liability. He was soft. He wanted to leave life, and he was going to take family secrets with him. I didn't sell him out. Jenna, I pruned a dead branch to save the tree. You had him killed, Jenna pressed. You set up the ambush with the Santoros. Business is business, Christian shrugged. And now, Mateo is the dead branch. The city is changing. Jenna, new players are coming in. The federal government is tired of the Valles family. I am just making sure I am on the winning side when the tower falls. And what about Eli? Jenna asked, tears of genuine anger stinging her eyes. He's your blood, too. In a way, the boy is at a loose end, Christian said coldly. But I am a merciful man. Give me Mateo. Tell me where he sleeps. Tell me the codes to his private accounts, and I will let you and the bastard leave the country. I have the codes, Jenna lied. She reached into her pocket. Smart girl. Christian grinned. You are right about one thing, Christian, Jenna said, her voice dropping to a steel whisper. Mateo is emotional. She pulled her hand out. It was empty. But he is not the one you should be afraid of. From the shadows of the rafters, a figure dropped. It happened in a blur of motion. Mateo landed on the concrete floor behind Christian's bodyguards. 2 shots rang out, suppressed, dull thuds, and the guards crumpled before they could even reach for their weapons. Christian spun around, his eyes wide. Mateo stood there, rising from a crouch. He looked like a reaper. He wore tactical black, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Mateo, Christian stammered, backing away. Mateo, listen to me. It was necessary. It was for the family. You are not the family, Mateo said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. He walked forward step by step, forcing Christian back toward Jenna. You are the cancer. I can help you, Christian pleaded, hitting the wall. I have connections. The feds. They are closing in. I can stop them. I have your confession, Mateo said, holding up his phone, which was linked to the wire. I have you admitting to Gabriel's murder. I have you conspiring against the Dawn. Mateo stopped inches from the older man. He didn't raise his gun. He placed his hands on Christian's shoulders, the way a son would greet a father. But his grip was crushing. Why? Mateo asked. One word, heavy with a lifetime of trust betrayed. Because you cannot win this one. Christian spat, his fear turning to venom. You think you are a king? You are a corpse walking? You want to know the truth. Mateo, you want to know who I am working with? I don't care, Mateo said. You should. Christian laughed, a wet, wheezing sound. Because the man running the task force, the man who is giving the feds every safe house, every bank account, every name, it isn't me. Jenna watched, a cold dread pooling in her stomach. It's Gabriel, Christian whispered. The world stopped. Jenna felt the air leave her lungs. What? He didn't die. Sweetheart, Christian sneered, looking past Mateo to Jenna. The ambush? It went wrong. The Santoros didn't kill him. The feds got him first. They pulled him out of the fire. He has been in protective custody for 7 years, waiting, building the case. Christian looked back at Mateo, his eyes gleaming with malice. Your brother isn't dead. Mateo, he's the star witness. He's the one burning your kingdom down. He traded you for his freedom. Mateo went rigid. The shock was physical, a blow that staggered him more than a bullet would have. Gabriel, his brother, the man he had mourned, the man whose son he was now raising, alive, and a traitor. Liar, Mateo breathed. Check the files, Christian taunted. Operation Lazarus, he is coming for you, Mateo, and he is coming for her. Mateo's face shuddered. The pain vanished, replaced by the absolute cold void of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Then he will find me waiting," Matteo said. He stepped back and raised his weapon. 2 shots, center mass. Christian slid down the wall, the silence reclaiming the factory. Matteo stood over the body for a long moment. He didn't look triumphant, he looked destroyed. Jenna walked over to him. She reached out, touching his arm. He was trembling. Fine. High-frequency tremors that vibrated through his rigid muscles. "Matteo," she whispered. He turned to her. His eyes were hollow. "He is alive. Gabriel is alive. He betrayed us," Jenna said, her voice shaking with fury. "He left me pregnant. He left you to mourn him. He is not the man we loved. Matteo, that man died 7 years ago." Matteo looked at her, and slowly, life returned to his eyes. Pain. Yes, but clarity. "We have to go," he said hoarsely. If Christian knew, then the raid was coming. Tonight. They didn't make it back to the tower. By the time they reached the SUV, the phones were lighting up. Silvio called, his voice panicked. "Boss, they're hitting the docks. They're hitting the warehouses. The accounts in the Caymans are frozen. Someone gave them the master keys." "Get the men underground," Matteo ordered. Driving one-handed, swerving through traffic. "Burn the files. Dump the hard drives. Matteo, the police are at the tower," Silvio shouted over the sound of sirens. "They have a warrant for you. RICO charges, murder, everything." "Where is the boy?" Matteo demanded. "I got him out," Silvio said. "He is with me. We are heading to the safe house in the old district, the one off the books. I will meet you there," Matteo said, and crushed the phone in his hand. He looked at Jenna. "It is over. The organization is gone." "I don't care about the organization," Jenna said. "I care about Eli." The safe house was a small, nondescript apartment above a bakery in the Italian quarter. It was the only place Gabriel didn't know about because Matteo had bought it under a fake name 2 weeks ago, specifically for this moment. When they burst through the door, Eli was sitting on the floor with Silvio, eating a biscotti. The boy looked up, sensing the tension, and ran to Jenna. "Mom!" Jenna scooped him up, burying her face in his neck, inhaling the scent of him. He was safe. Matteo dismissed Silvio. "Go. Save yourself. If they catch you, do not fight. Lawyer up?" "I am staying," Silvio said. "Go," Matteo roared. "That is an order." Silvio nodded once, looked at Jenna, and disappeared into the night. Matteo locked the door. He threw the deadbolt. He dragged a heavy dresser in front of it. Then he turned to the window, peering through the blinds. The street below was quiet, but he knew it was quiet before the tsunami. "Matteo?" Jenna said. He turned. He looked wild, his hair disheveled, his shirt stained with sweat and the dust of the factory. "We have to run," Jenna said. "Right now." We take the car. We drive west. We don't stop until we hit the coast, and then we find a boat. Matteo shook his head. "They have the plates. They have facial recognition software. Gabriel knows how I think. He knows my escape routes." "So we do something he doesn't expect," Jenna pleaded. "We leave it all behind. The money, the pride, we just go." Matteo looked at her, and then at Eli, who was watching them with wide, fearful eyes. "I can't," Matteo said. "If I run, they will hunt us forever. Gabriel won't stop. He needs me in a cage to buy his freedom. The only way out is to finish it." "You mean die?" Jenna cried. "That is what you mean. You want to stay here and have a shootout with the entire federal government." "I mean win," Matteo said intensely. He walked over to Eli. He knelt down. "Buddy, I need you to go into the bedroom and put on your headphones. Watch your tablet. Can you do that for me?" "Are the bad men coming?" Eli asked. "I won't let them in," Matteo promised. Eli hugged him, then ran into the bedroom. As soon as the door clicked shut, Jenna hit Matteo's chest with her fists. It wasn't a hard blow. It was frustration, fear, and love all tangled together. "Don't you dare," she sobbed. "Don't you dare be a martyr. I just found you." Matteo caught her wrists. He pulled her to him, crashing their bodies together. "I am not leaving you," he said. "Then come with us," she begged. "I have to buy us time." Matteo said, "I have a plan, but tonight we are here." The desperation in the room shifted. The air became heavy. charged with the knowledge that sunrise might bring the end of the world. Mateo looked at her mouth, his gaze darkening. "Jenna," he whispered. He kissed her, and it was like drowning. It was frantic and hungry. Jenna wrapped her legs around his waist as he lifted her, carrying her not to the bedroom where Eli was, but to the worn sofa in the corner of the shadowy living room. They tore at each other's clothes, the need for skin-on-skin contact overriding everything else. There was no finesse tonight. There was only the need to imprint this moment, this feeling, into their souls. Mateo worshipped her body with a desperation that broke her heart. He kissed the hollow of her throat, her collarbone, the scar on her shoulder. He moved with a heavy, driving rhythm that sought to anchor them to the earth, to prove that they were still alive, still breathing, still theirs. Jenna clung to him, her nails digging into the muscles of his back. She cried silently as they moved together, tears tracking into her hairline. She loved him. She loved this broken, dangerous man who had given up everything for a child that wasn't his. "I love you," she gasped against his shoulder. "Mateo, please." "I am here," he gritted out, holding her face between his hands. "Look at me. I am yours." When the crest came, it was shattering. They collapsed against each other, limbs tangled, hearts beating in a frantic, synchronized rhythm. The room was quiet again, save for the distant sound of sirens wailing in the city center. Mateo pulled his shirt over her to keep her warm, holding her against his chest. He stroked her hair, his touch rhythmic and soothing. "You have to promise me something," Jenna whispered into the darkness. "Anything," he said. "Don't die." Mateo was silent for a long time. He looked at the door, then at the window, plotting the impossible. He knew Gabriel. He knew the task force. He knew the odds were 0, but he looked down at the woman in his arms, and he knew he would burn the world down before he let her lose another person she loved. "I won't die," Mateo said. "How can you know?" "Because I have something Gabriel doesn't," Mateo said, his voice hardening with a new strategy taking shape in his mind. "He thinks he is fighting a criminal. He doesn't know he is fighting a father." He kissed the top of her head. "I will find a way to win," he promised, his voice low and absolute in the dark. "Then I am yours. Then we are free." "And Gabriel?" Jenna asked, the name bitter. Mateo's eyes narrowed in the gloom. "He wants to be a ghost? I will make him one." He sat up, gently moving Jenna aside. He stood and walked to the window, watching the first gray light of dawn bleed into the sky. The sirens were getting closer. "Get Eli up," Mateo said, turning back to her. He was no longer the lover. He was the general. It is time to execute the final play. The revolving doors of the federal building spun slowly, pushing the cold and rain-streaked air of Corvale City out and sucking the sterile, climate-controlled air in. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. The lobby was bustling with lawyers in gray suits and clerks clutching coffees, all moving with the frantic energy of the legal machine. No one noticed the black SUV idling at the curb. Inside, Mateo Velez adjusted his cuffs. He was not wearing his usual dark, intimidating three-piece suits today. He wore a navy blue blazer, a crisp white Oxford shirt, and chinos. He looked like a civilian. He looked like a father. "Are you ready?" Jenna asked from the passenger seat. She was pale, her hands gripping her knees. "No," Mateo said honestly, "but it is the only play we have left." He reached over, covering her trembling hands with his own. "Trust the plan. When they take you into custody, do not say a word. Wait for the lawyer. Wait for me. Mateo, if this goes wrong—" "It won't," he said, though his eyes held the hardness of a man betting his life on a coin toss. "I promised you we would win. This is how we win." He opened the door and stepped out. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He walked straight through the revolving doors, past the metal detectors and up to the front desk. The security guard looked up, bored. "Can I help you, sir?" "I am Mateo Velez," he said, his voice carrying over the hum of the lobby, "and I am here to surrender." The interrogation room was a windowless box of cinder block and fluorescent light. Mateo sat at the metal table, his hands resting calmly on the surface. Across from him sat Agent Miller, the head of the organized crime task force, and the man who had been protecting Gabriel. Miller looked smug. He tossed a file onto the table. "You made it easy for us, Velez. We were going to kick down your door tonight. Saving us the ammo was polite." "I am a polite man," Mateo said. "Where is the girl?" Miller asked, leaning forward. "And the kid?" "Gabriel wants to see his son." "They are safe," Mateo said. "And you aren't going to touch them." Miller laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "You are in no position to make demands. You are looking at life without parole. RICO, racketeering, murder. Your own brother is testifying against you." "My brother," Mateo said, his voice devoid of emotion, "is a ghost, and so are you." Mateo reached into his jacket pocket. Miller flinched, reaching for his holster. But Mateo only pulled out a small, silver flash drive. He slid it across the table. "What is this?" Miller asked. "That," Mateo said, "is a recording of Christian confessing to the murder of a rival gang leader 7 years ago. But more importantly, it is a recording of him admitting that he takes orders from you." Miller went still. "It also contains the bank ledgers from the Caymans," Mateo continued smoothly. "Not my accounts, yours. The accounts where Christian funneled the money he skimmed from my family, the money he used to pay you for protection." Mateo leaned back, crossing his arms. "I am not surrendering. Agent Miller, I am turning state's witness. I am blowing the whistle on a corrupt federal task force that has been using a protected witness, my brother, to run a shadow empire." Miller stared at the drive. The blood drained from his face. "If I don't walk out of here in 2 hours," Mateo said, checking his watch. "Copies of that drive go to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Attorney General's private email. Your career is over. Your freedom is over." "You can't prove it," Miller whispered. "I don't have to prove it," Mateo said coldly. "I just have to make enough noise that they open an investigation. And once they look, they will find everything." Mateo stood up. "Now, arrest me. But know that when you do, you are arresting the man who is about to put you in prison." The chaos that followed was absolute. Mateo's surrender triggered a domino effect that shattered the precarious balance of power in Corvale City. The evidence on the drive was undeniable. By noon, Internal Affairs had swarmed the building. Agent Miller was escorted out in handcuffs, shielding his face from the press. But the victory came with a heavy cost. In the confusion of the raids, Child Protective Services had been notified of a minor living with a known criminal associate. Because Jenna was using a fake identity, and because she had technically kidnapped Eli 7 years ago by fleeing, the system swallowed them whole. Jenna sat on a hard plastic chair in the hallway of the family court building, her eyes red and swollen. They had taken Eli. A social worker with a kind face but iron rules had pulled him from her arms at the precinct. Eli had screamed for her. He had screamed for Mateo. "Miss Rowe?" Jenna looked up. A court-appointed attorney stood there, looking harried. "The hearing is starting," the lawyer said. "The judge is going to determine temporary custody. We have a problem. Jenna, you have no legal standing. Your ID is fake. The birth certificate is sealed. Technically, the state doesn't know who this child belongs to. He is mine," Jenna said, her voice shaking with exhaustion. "He is my son." "Then you have to prove it," the lawyer said, "and you have to do it on the record, which means admitting to the federal crimes of identity, theft, and flight." "I don't care," Jenna said, standing up. "I will admit to anything. Just get me my son." The courtroom was small, smelling of lemon polish and despair. Judge Holloway sat behind the high bench, peering over her spectacles. Eli was not there. He was being held in a separate room, sparing him the trauma of the proceedings. Jenna stood at the plaintiff's table, alone. Her hands gripped the wood until her knuckles turned white. "State your name for the record," Judge Holloway said. "Jenna Rowe," she said, then closed her eyes. "My real name is Jenna Marino." A murmur went through the court. "And the child?" the judge asked. "His name is Eli," Jenna said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "I lied for 7 years. I told people he wasn't mine. I told people I was babysitting. I did it because his father's family was dangerous. I did it to keep him alive." She looked up at the judge, tears streaming down her face. "I am not a criminal. Your Honor, I am a mother. I have worked double shifts. I have lived in studio apartments. I have done everything to keep him safe. Please, he's terrified. He needs me." "The state is concerned about the environment the child was found in," the state prosecutor argued. "She was living with Mateo Velez, a known crime boss. The child was present during an armed conflict at a safe house." "Mr. Velez protected us," Jenna shouted. "Mr. Velez is a violent criminal," the prosecutor shot back. "Placing the child back in that environment is negligence." "Mr. Velez is no longer a criminal." The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Mateo Velez walked in. The air in the room seemed to shift. Bending toward him, he was flanked by a high-priced lawyer, but he didn't look like a defendant. He looked like a titan. He walked with a confident, purposeful stride, coming to a stop beside Jenna. He looked at her, his eyes soft and reassuring, before turning to the judge. "Your Honor," Mateo's lawyer said, "my client has just concluded a deal with the Department of Justice. All charges against him have been suspended, pending his cooperation in the dismantling of the Miller Task Force. He's a free man. That does not make him a suitable guardian," the judge said sternly. "Mr. Velez, you have no biological claim to this child." Mateo stepped forward. He didn't look at the prosecutor. He didn't look at the gallery. He looked only at the judge. "You are right," Mateo said. His voice was low, filling the quiet room. "I missed his first steps. I missed his first words. I do not share his DNA. His biological father is a man who sold him out for a plea deal." Jenna let out a small sob, covering her mouth. "I'm not a perfect man," Mateo continued, placing his hand on the table, right next to Jenna's. "I have done things I cannot undo, but for the last month, I have been the one teaching him to fish. I have been the one checking under his bed for monsters. I have been the one holding him when he cries." He looked at Jenna, and then back at the judge. "He's not my blood," Mateo declared, his voice cracking with raw emotion, "but he is mine now." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. The court reporter stopped typing. The prosecutor looked down at his notes, unable to meet Mateo's gaze. Mateo reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. "This is an adoption petition. I signed it 3 days ago, before the raids. It establishes a trust for the boy that guarantees his education, his safety, and his future, regardless of what happens to me." He slid the paper toward the bench. "I am dissolving the Velez organization," Mateo announced. "The assets are being liquidated. I am leaving the city. We are asking for the court's permission to leave as a family, to start over." Judge Holloway looked at the document. She looked at Mateo, seeing the desperation and the fierce love in his eyes. She looked at Jenna, who was looking at Mateo as if he were the only person in the world. The judge sighed, taking off her glasses. She was known for being harsh, but she was also known for being fair. "The state's primary concern is the safety of the child," Holloway said. "If you leave the city, Mr. Velez, you leave your history behind. Is that understood?" "Understood," Mateo said, Then, the judge said, banging her gavel, "Petition for temporary guardianship is granted to Miss Marino and Mr. Velez, pending the finalization of the adoption. Case closed." Jenna collapsed against Mateo. He caught her, wrapping his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. They held each other in the center of the courtroom, shaking with relief while the legal system churned on around them. The following week was a blur of motion. The news cycle was dominated by the scandal. The Velez disbandment was the headline on every paper. Corrupt agents were arrested in dawn raids. Christian's network was dismantled. Gabriel Velez, exposed as the architect of the corruption from within his protective custody, was transferred to a supermax prison. His deal revoked, his name disgraced. Mateo Velez died, at least on paper. The man who drove the nondescript sedan out of the city limits on a Tuesday morning was not a Don. He was just a man named Mateo. He wore jeans and a t-shirt. He had cash in a duffel bag and passports with new names in the glove box. Jenna sat in the passenger seat, watching the skyline of Corvale City fade in the rearview mirror. It was gray and raining, just as it had been the night she met him. "Are you okay?" Mateo asked, reaching over to squeeze her hand. Jenna looked at him. The tension that had defined his face for so long was gone. "I'm not scared," she realized, smiling. "For the first time in my life, I'm not scared." "Good," Mateo said. "Keep looking forward." In the back seat, Eli was asleep, clutching a new fishing rod. 6 months later, the house was small, painted a soft yellow, sitting on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The air here smelled of salt and wild sage. There were no sirens, no gunfire, just the rhythmic crashing of the waves. Jenna sat on the porch swing, a glass of lemonade in her hand. She was watching the beach below. Mateo was down near the waterline. He had Eli on his shoulders. The boy was shrieking with laughter, holding onto Mateo's hair as Mateo spun him around, pretending to be a monster chasing the waves. They looked like a painting. The dark-haired man and the dark-haired boy, silhouetted against the setting sun. Mateo set Eli down and helped him start digging in the wet sand. They were building something, a castle. Not a fortress to hide in, but a castle to live in. Jenna set her glass down and walked down the wooden stairs to the sand. The wind whipped her hair around her face. Mateo looked up as she approached. He smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached his eyes. He wiped his sandy hands on his shorts and walked to meet her. "The tide is coming in," he said. "We have to build the moat fast." "He's determined to make it 3 stories tall." Jenna laughed, looking at Eli, who was furiously packing sand into a bucket. She looked back at Mateo. He looked younger here. The sun had tanned his skin, and the shadows under his eyes had vanished. "Mateo," she said softly. "Yeah? I love you." Mateo went still. She had said it before, in moments of passion or fear, but this was different. This was quiet. This was deliberate. "I love you," she repeated, stepping closer. "Not because you saved us. Not because you fought for us." She reached up, placing her hands on his chest, over his heart. "I love you because you chose us," she whispered. "You could have walked away. You could have kept your empire. But you chose to be his father. You chose to be my partner." Mateo looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. He reached out, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her in until there was no space left between them. "There was no choice," Mateo said, his voice rough with emotion. "From the moment I saw you in that alley, from the moment I kissed his forehead, there was no choice. You were already mine." He kissed her. It was slow and deep, tasting of salt air and forever. It wasn't the desperate kiss of 2 people running for their lives. It was the kiss of 2 people who had finally arrived home. The ocean crashed behind them, a roar of approval from the universe. "Hey," Eli shouted from the sandcastle, "are you guys going to help or just kiss?" Mateo broke the kiss, laughing against Jenna's lips. He looked down at her, his eyes shining. "We're coming, boss," Mateo shouted back. He took Jenna's hand. His grip was warm and solid. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," Jenna said. They walked toward the water together, hand in hand, leaving the shadows of the past behind them. Eli looked up and grinned, handing Mateo a plastic shovel. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. The sandcastle stood tall against the tide, and for the first time, the family was whole. No more lies, no more fear, just peace. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey bringing Jenna, Mateo, and Eli from the shadows of Corvale City to the peace of the coast. I hope you enjoyed the ride as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. Did the ending satisfy you? What was your favorite moment between Mateo and Jenna? If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories so you don't miss the next adventure. Share your thoughts in English in the comments section. Your feedback means the world to me. Until next time.